There is a moment when effort stops feeling noble and starts feeling heavy. You wake up already tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the quiet pressure to push again. More hours. More discipline. More force. Somewhere along the way, working harder became the only answer you were allowed to give yourself. The world praises endurance. It claps for exhaustion disguised as commitment. If you feel weak, you are told to add pressure. If you fall behind, you are told to tighten control. Discipline becomes a weapon you turn inward, believing that intensity will save you from doubt. Yet something strange happens. The harder you grip, the more fragile you feel. You follow the rules. You show up. You push through resistance. On the surface, it looks like strength. Underneath, your nervous system stays clenched, your attention narrows, your creativity thins out. Progress slows, not because you lack effort, but because effort is no longer guided by clarity. You are running on force instead of direction. Ancient monks warned about this long before productivity systems existed. Modern neuroscience now confirms it. When pressure never releases, the mind shifts into survival. Learning drops. Judgment distorts. Discipline without wisdom becomes strain. And strain slowly erodes the very strength it promises to build. This is the discipline trap. It convinces you that more effort equals more growth, while quietly draining your capacity to adapt. You do not burn out from laziness. You burn out from misapplied control. Real discipline is quieter. It knows when to advance and when to soften. It builds strength by aligning effort with timing, not by crushing resistance at all costs. There is another way to work, one that sharpens instead of exhausts, one that leaves you steadier at the end of the day than at the beginning. If this tension feels familiar, it may be time to notice what your effort has been trying to tell you. Chapter 1: The Awakening. He did everything right. Or at least everything he was taught was right. Wake early. Move fast. Fill the day with effort until silence finally arrived at night. Discipline was his identity, the proof that he was not weak, not drifting, not like the people who gave up when things became uncomfortable. At first, it worked. Structure brought relief. Clear rules removed uncertainty. Each completed task delivered a small sense of control. Life felt manageable when measured in checklists and hours survived. He learned to override hesitation and call it strength. But over time, something subtle began to crack. Rest stopped restoring him. Focus became brittle. Small setbacks felt personal, almost insulting. When progress slowed, his response was automatic. Add pressure. Wake earlier. Push harder. Remove softness. Discipline, once a tool, became a reflex. Inside, the same pattern repeated. Resistance arose, not as laziness, but as a quiet tightening in the chest. The body hesitated before the mind could explain why. He ignored it. He had been trained to mistrust hesitation. To him, any pause felt like failure. Weeks blurred together. Productivity stayed high, yet satisfaction faded. He was always behind an invisible standard that kept moving further away. The more he chased it, the less grounded he felt. Discipline was no longer creating freedom. It was consuming attention. This is where the awakening begins. Not with collapse, but with confusion. Why does effort feel heavier now than before? Why does doing more produce less clarity? Why does strength feel so fragile despite constant exertion? The nervous system does not speak in words. It speaks through tension, fatigue, irritability, and loss of perspective. When pressure never releases, the system shifts into defense. Muscles stay ready. Breath shortens. Attention narrows to immediate threats. In this state, discipline becomes survival behavior, not conscious choice. He mistook endurance for alignment. He believed that resistance must always be conquered, never listened to. Yet resistance was not the enemy. It was a signal that force had replaced direction. This realization did not arrive as insight. It arrived as weariness. A sense that something essential was being missed, even while everything looked correct from the outside. The old formula demanded more effort. The body quietly asked for intelligence. Between these two voices, a space opened. Small at first. Easy to ignore. But once noticed, impossible to unsee. This is the first crack in the discipline trap. Not a rebellion against effort, but a question about how effort is being used. And in that question, a different kind of strength begins to stir. Chapter 2, The Ancient Principle. Long before schedules were optimized and effort became a metric, monks noticed a pattern in the mind. Those who strained too tightly during meditation did not become clear. They became restless. Those who forced stillness created noise. The instruction was simple and difficult. Apply effort like holding a bird. Too loose, it escapes. Too tight, it breaks. In Zen monasteries, discipline was never about domination. It was about rhythm. Bowing, sweeping, sitting, eating. Each action precise, yet unforced. When a student pushed too hard, the teacher did not praise intensity. He corrected posture. He slowed the breath. He returned the student to balance. The ancient principle was not anti-effort. It was anti-excess. Effort without sensitivity was seen as ignorance. True discipline emerged from awareness of timing, not from willpower alone. This wisdom was transmitted quietly, through form rather than instruction. Modern neuroscience now mirrors this understanding. The brain learns best in a state of engaged calm. When the nervous system feels safe, the prefrontal cortex stays online. Judgment sharpens. Memory integrates. Creativity flows. When pressure rises too high, control shifts downward. Survival circuits dominate. Learning narrows. Adaptation stalls. The monks did not know these terms, yet they observed the same truth. A mind under constant pressure loses flexibility. A body held in tension mistakes effort for danger. Discipline that ignores this creates compliance, not mastery. There is a subtle difference between commitment and compulsion. Commitment has choice inside it. Compulsion does not. When effort becomes compulsive, it no longer serves intention. It serves fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of stopping. Here, a quiet recognition can appear. You may notice that some of your hardest pushing is not driven by clarity, but by avoidance. Avoidance of uncertainty. Avoidance of rest. Avoidance of listening. This is not a failure. It is a signal. In Buddhist psychology, suffering increases when grasping tightens. Grasping is the attempt to control outcomes that are still unfolding. Discipline becomes suffering when it tries to guarantee results through force. The paradox is that release restores effectiveness. Neuroscience calls this regulation. The ancients called it harmony. Different languages pointing to the same mechanism. When effort is matched to capacity, strength accumulates. When effort ignores capacity, strength leaks away. The discipline trap forms when intensity is mistaken for sincerity. The ancient principle asks a different question. Not how hard can you push, but how well can you listen while moving forward. In that listening, effort regains intelligence. And discipline returns to its original role, not as a whip, but as a guide. Chapter 3, The Internal War. The conflict is not between discipline and comfort. It is between two ancient systems inside the body, each trying to keep you alive in a different way. One pushes forward. The other pulls back. When misunderstood, this tension feels like self-sabotage. The nervous system evolved to detect threat long before it learned to plan goals. When pressure rises without relief, the body does not interpret it as ambition. It interprets it as danger. Heart rate elevates. Muscles tighten. Attention narrows. This state is useful for short bursts. It is destructive when prolonged. Here is where the internal war begins. The conscious mind demands consistency. Show up no matter what. Override resistance. The body responds with fatigue, irritability, distraction, and dullness. Each side believes it is protecting you. Neither is wrong. They are simply speaking different languages. What you call laziness is often a braking mechanism. What you call weakness is often a request for regulation. When these signals are ignored, the system escalates. Procrastination grows. Motivation fractures. Focus becomes brittle. You push harder, and the resistance hardens. This creates a feedback loop. Pressure creates tension. Tension reduces performance. Reduced performance triggers more pressure. The loop tightens until effort feels like self-harm rather than self-mastery. There is a quiet moment when this can be noticed. You may observe that even when you succeed, relief is brief. Satisfaction evaporates quickly. The nervous system never stands down. Victory does not feel safe enough to rest inside. This is not because you are ungrateful. It is because the system never left survival mode. Biology explains this without judgment. When cortisol stays elevated, the brain prioritizes threat detection over long-term thinking. The prefrontal cortex loses influence. Habits become rigid. Perspective shrinks. You become efficient, but not wise. This is why working harder can make you weaker. Not morally weaker. Nervously weaker. Adaptively weaker. Strength is not just output. It is recovery, flexibility, and capacity to learn. The internal war ends when effort stops arguing with sensation. When discipline listens to the body instead of trying to dominate it. Regulation replaces suppression. Effort becomes precise rather than loud. This does not mean stopping. It means recalibrating. Shortening the leash. Allowing moments of downshift. Letting the nervous system complete its stress cycle instead of freezing inside it. The warrior traditions understood this intuitively. Tension held too long dulls the blade. A mind always braced loses timing. The trap is believing that resistance must be defeated. The exit is realizing it must be understood. When that shift occurs, the internal war begins to dissolve. And discipline stops being a battlefield, becoming a skillful movement forward. Chapter 4, The System. The shift does not happen through motivation. It happens through structure. Not the kind that tightens, but the kind that holds. A system that regulates effort instead of glorifying strain. Most people believe discipline means doing the maximum every day. That belief is the root of collapse. Real systems are built around minimums that can be honored even on unstable days. They are designed to survive fatigue, not deny it. The system begins with a rule that feels almost disappointing. Never push at full intensity for long. Intensity is a spice, not a diet. It sharpens moments. It cannot sustain a life. Instead, effort is capped deliberately. Work ends before exhaustion. Training stops with energy still in reserve. Focus sessions close while attention is still clean. This creates a paradoxical effect. Progress becomes repeatable. The nervous system learns that effort does not equal danger. This is not softness. It is strategy. In disciplined traditions, repetition mattered more than heroics. 1,000 ordinary days shaped the practitioner, not a few brutal ones. The system protected continuity. It made returning inevitable. Identity shifts here. You stop seeing yourself as someone who forces outcomes. You become someone who maintains conditions. Conditions for clarity. Conditions for learning. Conditions for recovery. The system also removes decision fatigue. Fixed start times. Fixed end times. Clear boundaries. When effort has edges, it stops leaking into everything. Rest becomes legitimate instead of stolen. There is another rule, less obvious but more important. Effort must be followed by downshift. Breath slows. Body releases. Attention widens. Without this, the stress cycle never completes. The system accumulates noise instead of strength. You do not wait to relax until everything is finished. That day never comes. You regulate in small intervals, repeatedly, deliberately. This trains safety back into motion. Here, discipline stops being moral. It becomes mechanical. Input leads to predictable output. When fatigue rises, intensity drops, not because of weakness, but because the system demands longevity. A quiet confidence emerges. You no longer rely on mood. You rely on design. Even difficult days move forward, not through force, but through containment. There is a moment when you notice something unexpected. You begin to trust yourself again. Not because you are pushing harder, but because you are not abandoning yourself under pressure. This system does not promise speed. It promises sustainability. Over time, sustainability outperforms intensity every time. Discipline regains its original meaning. To teach. To shape. To guide behavior gently toward a direction that can be held. When effort is placed inside a system that respects the nervous system, strength compounds. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Reliably. And once this is felt in the body, returning to the old way becomes very difficult. Chapter 5, Practice Without Gaps. The danger is not inconsistency. The danger is the belief that practice only counts when it feels strong. This belief creates gaps, and gaps break trust with yourself. Practice without gaps means removing the dramatic standard. It means showing up in forms so small they cannot threaten the nervous system. 5 minutes. 1 page. 1 deliberate breath. The scale is less important than the continuity. Most people fail not because they stop, but because they stop completely. 1 missed day becomes a story. The story becomes judgment. Judgment drains energy. And soon the system collapses under its own expectations. The disciplined path avoids this by design. On low-capacity days, the practice changes shape, not existence. Movement becomes gentler. Focus becomes shorter. Output becomes simpler. The rule is absolute. Never drop to 0. 0 teaches disappearance. Small teaches return. This is how trust is rebuilt. Not through intensity, but through reliability. In monasteries, practice continued regardless of mood. On restless days, monks swept floors. On tired days, they bowed slowly. The form held them when motivation could not. Modern life demands the same intelligence. Practice without gaps also trains humility. You stop demanding that each day prove something. You stop auditioning for an imagined observer. Effort becomes private. Quiet. Clean. There is a moment in this phase when impatience arises. Progress feels too subtle. The old urge to push resurfaces. This is where most systems break. This is where the discipline trap tries to reclaim control. The response is not resistance. It is containment. You remind the system that safety is not negotiable. You finish early on purpose. You leave energy unused. You let the body learn that consistency does not require self-threat. Something unexpected happens here. Identity shifts again. You stop seeing yourself as someone who battles inconsistency. You become someone who practices as naturally as eating. No heroism. No collapse. Just rhythm. This is where strength begins to accumulate without announcement. Focus steadies. Motivation stops swinging. Recovery deepens. The nervous system learns that effort is survivable. There is a quiet dignity in this phase. Nothing dramatic appears on the surface. But underneath, something important is happening. You are no longer breaking yourself to move forward. This is the discipline most people never reach because it does not flatter the ego. It does not feel impressive. It feels ordinary. And that is why it works. Practice without gaps is not about doing more. It is about refusing to disappear from your own life, even on the days when disappearing would feel easier. This is where the system becomes real. Chapter 6, Identity Collapse. There comes a point when the old identity can no longer hold. Not because it was wrong, but because it was built for a narrower version of life. The one who survived by force begins to fail in a system that now demands finesse. This collapse is rarely dramatic. No breakdown. No public failure. It arrives as a dull sense of mismatch. The old rules still function, but they cost too much. What once felt honorable now feels crude. What once felt strong now feels loud. The disciplined self that relied on pressure starts to fracture. You notice it when familiar methods stop working. When motivation feels artificial. When intensity produces diminishing returns. The instinct is to double down. To revive the old self with more effort. This only accelerates the collapse. Identity collapse is uncomfortable because it removes certainty. You no longer know which part of you should lead. The one who pushes or the one who listens. The one who conquers or the one who regulates. This is not weakness. It is transition. Psychologically, identity forms around strategies that once ensured safety. When the environment changes, those strategies become outdated. The nervous system senses this before the mind accepts it. Confusion appears. Friction rises. Old confidence dissolves. Many retreat here. They rebuild the old identity even tighter. More rules. More rigidity. This restores a sense of control but at the cost of growth. The collapse asks for something else. It asks you to let go of the image of yourself as the one who endures everything. To release the belief that suffering equals sincerity. There is grief in this. The old self worked hard. It kept you moving. It deserves respect. But it cannot lead anymore. In this space, discipline must detach from ego. It can no longer be proof of worth. It becomes a function. A tool. Neutral. Adaptive. There is a quiet moment in this chapter where resistance softens, and something steadier begins to organize itself underneath. The collapse is not the loss of discipline. It is the loss of the identity that needed discipline to feel valid. When this is allowed, a new orientation forms. One that values precision over force. Sustainability over performance. Presence over pressure. This is the threshold. Beyond it, effort no longer exists to defend an image. It exists to serve a direction. And once crossed, there is no honest way back. Chapter 7, Transformation. Transformation does not announce itself. It reveals itself through behavior that no longer requires internal argument. You wake without bracing. You begin without negotiating. You stop without guilt. Effort flows inside clear edges. The new identity is quieter. It does not need to prove discipline. It expresses it naturally. Work happens. Rest happens. Both are legitimate. You no longer confuse discomfort with progress. You recognize when tension is useful and when it is noise. The nervous system stays responsive instead of rigid. Strength becomes adaptable. This is the mark of real discipline. Not obedience to rules, but alignment with reality. You still work hard. Perhaps harder than before. But the work no longer erodes you. It sharpens you. Fatigue is addressed early. Resistance is interpreted correctly. Recovery is part of the system, not a reward. Others may not notice the change immediately. There is less drama now. Less visible struggle. But inside, something fundamental has shifted. You trust yourself under pressure. You do not abandon yourself when things get difficult. This trust compounds. Over time, capacity grows. Focus deepens. Creativity returns. The discipline trap loses its grip because fear is no longer steering effort. The ancient and the modern converge here. Harmony and regulation. Wisdom and biology. Different lenses revealing the same outcome. Discipline is no longer something you do. It is something you inhabit. The transformation is not about becoming relentless. It is about becoming accurate. Knowing when to push. Knowing when to pause. Knowing that strength includes restraint. This path is not impressive to watch. It is powerful to live. The final question is not whether you can work harder. It is whether you are willing to let go of the version of discipline that made you feel strong, so you can grow into the one that actually is. The discipline trap survives because it feels virtuous. It disguises strain as commitment and pressure as purpose. It convinces you that if something hurts, it must be working. Over time, this belief narrows the mind and hardens the body until effort loses its intelligence. What you have seen here is not an argument against discipline. It is a correction of its meaning. Discipline was never meant to be a constant tightening. It was meant to be a steady relationship with effort. One that listens as much as it acts. One that understands that strength grows through cycles, not through permanent tension. When effort is guided by regulation, you stop living in reaction. You begin to choose your pace. You conserve what matters. You apply pressure only where it belongs. The nervous system stays responsive. The mind stays clear. Progress stops feeling like self-erosion. This is not an easier path. It is a more honest one. It demands attention instead of brute force. It asks you to notice when you are pushing out of fear rather than direction. It requires restraint, which is the rarest form of strength. The quiet truth is this. Working harder was never the solution. Working with awareness was. When discipline stops trying to prove something and starts serving something, it becomes sustainable. And sustainability is what allows growth to continue long after intensity burns out. If you move forward from here with a little less force and a little more precision, something subtle will already be changing.